Okay, and so we, as I had already said, for our class today, we have plenty of papers to discuss. I'm not sure if we'll be able to discuss all of them thoroughly here, but if not, what we'll do is, again, as we usually do in the second part of our meetings, we will do it through our Moodle forum, and we will discuss there. I will pose a few questions. And we'll be able to discuss there whatever we're not able to cover in this first half of our time together. As you were not all with us yet, and while we were waiting for some of you to show up, I was already telling the guys that were already around that I had a tough week with an old uncle in hospital, and I had to spend time with him for 2 days. So this is why I didn't answer to Gustavo's request about, there was a missing link for one of the papers. Don't worry, I may very quickly talk about that paper, but we always have plenty of material to discuss anyway. If any of the links is missing for whatever reason, and if you can't reach that paper, we can either do it later, or we just consider it's another paper talking sort of about the same topic, right? The idea today is we've had a few classes in which we have been discussing this concept of collective intelligence, and I'm sure that some of you still feel, I don't necessarily understand what collective intelligence is. It seems to be, sometimes it seems to be a narrow discipline, sometimes it seems to embrace the whole world, right? And in fact, the more I read about it and the more I study it, the more I feel that it's really a very, very open, very broad field of study, and that we can take several different perspectives. In fact, you will see, and you've probably seen some of the reading that we have sometimes, for example, biologists taking an approach that is usually different to that we take in social sciences, right? So in business sociology, will not usually think that we're going to perform collective intelligence the same way as ants or bees do, although there's a lot of reference to their connecting not very clever individuals in a way that they collectively become stronger, right? But we see, for example, the biologists influencing a lot computer science. If we get computer science papers on collective intelligence, they will usually be more interested in thinking in ways their computer programs could mimic what ants or what bees do, because that way they can have very, how would I call, very simple agents. And we usually, as humans, as creators of, let's say, of agents, we still, the robots that we create tend to be much simpler than, at least than we are, for now. So what they do is we can create a lot of very simple agents, and then we have them perform the way ants do, or the way that bees do, or some other animals do, and then as a collective, they become much smarter, right? So each different field will have a different perspective to collective intelligence, and that will bring, at the same time, it will bring complexity, because it's different people using the same vocabulary to talk about things that are slightly different, basically because they are looking at it from a different angle. But at the same time, it brings a lot of opportunity for us to share ideas among these different disciplines, and to learn from one another. Basically, using what collective intelligence claims to be, this opportunity to come up with new and higher levels of intelligence based on the diversity of those involved. Okay, so we had already discussed a lot about that, and but we haven't done it in a more formal way. So today is a class in which we will study, or we'll discuss a few papers in which some of the authors are trying to somehow set the boundaries of collective intelligence, although I do not think that they or we will succeed in doing that, right? But anyway, we have, and let me share my screen here with you. We have, where is that? Just a second. Okay, let me see. Is it? Well, let me just one second. I think I had. Just a second. Just have to let me check some news. Okay. Right. Can you see my screen there? Are you seeing my
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay. So this was the screen for today's class. You'll see there's plenty to be discussed there. The first authors here, Malone and Atlee, they both have these papers discussed in a book. It is a book that was released in 2008, but it's basically a collection of papers that had been written during 3 or 4 years, probably since the MIT started their own collective intelligence research group. And they are trying to, my understanding of this collection is that they are trying to talk among themselves and even get to define words or expressions that they can use. You will see, for example, that I think Tom Atlee, the second author here, the term that he had coined was co-intelligence, right? And so we had people talking about co-intelligence, we had people talking about collective intelligence, we had people talking about the wisdom of crowds, and so on and so forth. And I think that the attempt of this book, and in fact, I think, well, you have the links you have there allow you to see all the papers in the book, right? So we just picked 2 of those. But what they're trying to do is to provide us with these different angles and see how they could bring them together somehow, right? But let's be a little more orderly here. Let's start with Malone, 2008. This is basically, Malone is or used to be in fact, I don't know if he's still ahead of this, but he used to be the leader. He started the collective intelligence group at the MIT. And you see that he is a co-author in many papers about this topic because he was really involved with, or has been involved with collective intelligence for now 15 years. Right? In this first paper here, basically what he tries to do is to build an agenda for collective intelligence research. So although he did this in 2006, I think that there's still at least, and we are sort of, unfortunately, we're always sort of behind, right? We're always some 10 years behind what happens in the United States, mainly in science. So we're trying to catch up here, but I still think that some of the ideas he brings in the paper here are good for people who are thinking about studying collective intelligence and having and developing their own research agendas for that. So basically what he says, or in this paper, he says that there's going to be a lot of case studies, and case studies are, for those who are business graduates, case studies is a very typical and very usual way of doing research in business and in the social sciences in general, because we can, it's not that it's impossible to perform experiments, but it's difficult to perform experiments with people. There's a lot of situations in which we have to consider ethical issues, we have to consider, and basically we have to consider the fact that humans are, well, if not unpredictable, that there are so many variables that it's difficult for us to try and separate only the variables that we want to study. So case studies usually are a methodology that provide for a possibility of doing research in a, let's say, in a softer environment, we don't get to the same precise conclusions that many statistical studies provide in other areas, but at least they provide us with probably with the right direction. What researchers there try to do many times is being effective in depicting the right problems and trying to go for the right solutions, instead of being efficient and being very, very accurate about something, but at the same time being sort of meaningless, because the problem about which they can be accurate is not necessarily the problem that would be more interesting to solve at that time. So case studies made for computer science and in our case, the applied computing program, case studies may not be the best approach. In fact, I think that one way that you can go in applied computing is doing what it is usually called design science research. You basically, as you have to work on a technological artifact, you have to develop something, you have to think about developing and testing that afterwards to check if the results you got with whatever artifact you built were those that you expected beforehand. So we have to have our hypothesis, we have to have our ideas of where we want to go, and then we do something, and then we check, a little bit like what the Japanese do with the plan, do, check, and act, right? The PDCA cycle. We should also do that in our research. He claims that we need, and notice he was saying that this in 2005, so a lot of this has already been done, or at least a lot of this has already been done from their perspective and taking into account the situations in North America. New examples, they had in the first few years of their project, they mapped hundreds of organizations that built on collective intelligence. And after they did that, they started checking in which ways they were similar and where they were different and so on and so forth. And they even got to those collective intelligence genes that Malone talks about in another paper that we'll discuss later today, right? He mentions another possibility of studies in collective intelligence would be developing systematic experiments. But again, systematic experiments are not necessarily easy to perform in business, and may not be, well, they could be the case in applied computing, mainly if you are able to set an environment in which you act based on the computational artifact that you created, and you spare another sample, let's say, where you don't act, and then you compare. So this would be an example of an experiment. We're all sort of familiar with what an experiment is, because we've all seen the way that psychologists and many other researchers deal with mice, for example, to do their or to go on with their research, and how they experiment with animals, because they can or could not experiment with humans. And then a last topic that he considers important here is theory development. In fact, this is where I think that we could try it and progress the furthest, trying to develop theory that helps us predict or help us in many ways using collective intelligence in a better way than we've been able to so far, right? Some of the papers that we'll discuss later on today talk, for example, about organizing teams. If we have to organize teams of members who have individual intelligences, how do we come up with the strongest collective intelligence, right? Wolley, mainly working together with Malone, but also with some other researchers, even this Agarwal, who's, well, the name is definitely Indian or Pakistani or whatever, But Agarwal is currently a researcher here at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Rio de Janeiro. Some of these people believe that we can sort of trace what the characteristics of a collective are so that it becomes more intelligent, right? I don't know if they have gone as far as they could. Well, they surely went as far as they could with the research they did, but I don't know if they went all the way to some more complete knowledge about that. They gave us a few hints of directions that we can go, but there's still a lot that I guess we can do with respect to better understanding groups, the way groups decide, the way groups perform, the way they act, and what makes a group, a team, more efficient than others. This would be very important for business organizations because, of course, they want to be more efficient and more effective. But it would also be very important to any other sort of organization on Earth. Understanding what makes us more competent helps us build better teams, or at least helps us building the qualities, the features among those individuals in the team so that it can perform better, right? Well, so I guess this was Malone's paper. It's a very simple, very quick paper. At the end, he has a few motivating questions that go towards this direction of building an agenda for collective intelligence research. And in fact, the MIT, after the after this time, the 2008, when the paper was published, has still had several conferences on collective intelligence in which the topic has been further discussed. So I guess this is it. I don't know if you had any other impressions here from Malone's 2006 paper, the first paper that we had there. I don't know if you have any remarks or questions about that you would like to share with us. People saying things here. Let me see. Okay, it's all right. It's just Lucas that was just getting into the room. Okay, if not, the second paper was the one by Tom Atlee. It was published in the same book, the 2008 book that where Malone had his paper published as well. Basically, as I said, these authors are all trying to somehow to start organizing their ideas, organizing even the vocabulary that they will be using to discuss a scientific topic. And here Tom Atlee, as being the researcher who had coined the term co-intelligence, starts defining it as a little different, for example, than what he was perceiving as being collective intelligence. For example, he says that when he coins the term co-intelligence, he was thinking of the wisdom of the whole on behalf of the whole. It's all working together for the benefit of everyone. If this, again, these terms have, they keep evolving, and it depends not only on whoever proposes them, it also depends on the way that we as a community of researchers, and then we as the population of Earth decide on using those terms, right? So I cannot assure you that everyone else who talks about co-intelligence would follow necessarily what Tom Atlee meant, but he's saying, notice that there is a difference here. And it's good if we start making sure that in our own discussion, we take those differences into account. Because if we think, or if we decide that we're going, whenever we want to talk about everyone making an effort for everyone's benefit, we call that co-intelligence. it's only part of collective intelligence. Do you agree? Because there are situations in which we will have a lot of people providing efforts and doing things, so that a lot of people putting efforts into something, but the result is not necessarily going to be shared by everyone. And that's something that we still call collective intelligence, right? For example, when Google gets, of course, Google gives us some benefit as well, otherwise we would not collaborate with their project. But when Google gets our knowledge into their knowledge base, let's say, into its into its knowledge base, it keeps it for itself. It can provide, of course, many times it feeds us back with information and knowledge that is also important to us, but they keep the control of let's say of the database. They don't, it's not open source, right? So they can do whatever they wish with it at any time. So that's still collective intelligence, but it would not be, according to Atlee's definition, it would not be co-intelligence, right? Because it's a lot of people, all of us, working on a project that will benefit, at least in different scales, will benefit Google more than anyone else. If this example is not that great, because we can always discuss and say that, well, but there is benefit for everyone else. Think of, for example, a situation of crowdsourcing, for example. Crowdsourcing is a situation in which we definitely have collective intelligence taking place, but not necessarily co-intelligence, because not everyone will benefit from it. Of course, whoever hired or whoever challenged the crowds to provide possible solutions for a problem, they will benefit because they will get the solution to their problem. They will be able to select the best solution, and then they will somehow pay for that solution to whoever gave it, but the others who gave ideas may not get anything, right? Well, what I'm saying here is that we'll have to be careful as we study, and this is something that you should, as you read, you should start organizing your own schemes, your own categorizations of what people are talking about, because there may be subtle differences, even in terminology, that we will try to respect. If we don't build a common vocabulary that can express different ideas in a more sophisticated way, we will never be able to develop these more sophisticated ideas, right? So we will have to also build this vocabulary, right? And you'll see that there are many authors who will be coining new terms within this attempt of getting a more precise, more sophisticated vocabulary that leads to a better discussion of possibilities in the future. If we only have one expression that talks about all different possibilities, it's difficult to get mixed up. Okay. All right. So let me just come back here, and some of the things that I highlighted in this Atlee's paper, and we'll have to be careful here because we only have three minutes and 40 seconds before the session is over. Then I'll have to start a second session, okay? But one of the things that is interesting here is that first he says that collective intelligence happens in several different scales. The first one I had never thought of before reading his paper, he says there is an individual collective intelligence. And I said, huh? How can that be? Individual, you mean I, myself in my brain, and have different collectives here? Well, yes, if we think of how psychologists deal with our thinking, yes, we have different individuals. Part of us is more selfish, part of us is more altruist, part of us is more outgoing, part of us is shyer, and we have these different individuals within ourselves, these different individuals that are part of a collective, and there is always either someone ruling or there is some compromise there. So notice how interesting that is. The first level of collective intelligence is that collective intelligence of our own neurons fighting each other to see how we will present ourselves to the world. What image we want to give others about ourselves, because we're never ourselves. We are whatever we convey to others. Then a second level is what he calls interpersonal or relational collective intelligence. This is easier. It's probably one of the most basic, and this is actually what we're doing here. We're sharing ideas. Different people come with different perspectives that helps us create a better, or at least a more thorough understanding of a situation. A group collective intelligence would be going a little further with that. Well, probably what he refers to interpersonal or relational, he's probably talking more like in a dialogue. And here when we get to group, it's more people. And then an activity collective intelligence, people that are involved with the same task and have to decide how to deal with it. Organizational collective intelligence, network collective intelligence, and then he starts going to community or neighborhoods, community, city, country, state, province, regional, national collective intelligence, and he ends up to the global humanity that is almost thinking of all of us as one only brain, right? So this is an interesting way of us to think of collective intelligence, seeing that it has several levels in which it may happen, right? I think I'll have to close this Zoom meeting right now, and I will just send you another link through our WhatsApp, okay? So see you in a second.